we have 4 panelists today: Mr. Milton Haughton, Mr. Keith Nichols, Mr. Adrian LaRoda, and Mr. Peter Murray, who could not participate, but he has provided a video recording of his presentation. And we will tell you a little bit about our panelists. So Mr. Milton Haughton, he is the Executive Director of the CRFM Secretariat, and he will be discussing climate change, ocean acidification, and disaster risk management in Caribbean fisheries and aquaculture. He has over 43 years of experience in fisheries in the Caribbean, and he has served with the CRFM from its inception in 2003. He brings a wealth of experience in fisheries, aquaculture, development, governance, coastal and marine resource conservation and management, public administration, project management, and law. On to our next panelist, Mr. Keith Nichols. He is the head of the Program Development and Management Unit with the 5Cs Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, and he will be discussing the key outcomes of COP28 and implications and opportunities for Caribbean fisheries. He has an extensive background in coastal resources management, environmental management, climate change, and disaster risk reduction, and he has served since 2014 as the chair of the Comprehensive Disaster Management Coordination and Harmonization Council of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. On to our next panelist, Mr. Adrian LaRoda, who is the chair of the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organisations, and he will be discussing improving the resilience of Caribbean fisheries and coastal communities to the impacts of climate change. He's also the president of the Bahamas Commercial Fishers Alliance, and he has been a very active and a long-standing advocate for the improvement of the fishery sector and the interests of fishers across the Caribbean. He has also given back to the community through mentoring youth and fishers. And finally, our last panelist, Mr. Peter Murray. He is the advisor for fisheries management and development with the CRFM Secretariat, and his presentation will cover the state of knowledge and understanding of climate change, impacts on marine ecosystems, fisheries, and aquaculture. He currently serves as advisor for fisheries management and development, and he leads on monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement, as well as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and fisheries crime matters. He's also the convener of the WCAFC Regional Working Group on IUU fishing. Thank you. Okay, and then the discussions will be moderated by Ms. Sanya Compton, our research graduate, research and resource assessment. And the discussion will focus around, again, addressing climate change, ocean acidification, and disaster risk reduction in CARICOM fisheries and aquaculture, a collective responsibility. And our closing remarks will be provided by Mrs. June Masters, our statistics and information analyst with the CRFM Secretariat. And we have available numerous resources on our website, so please visit us at online, www.crfm.int, and we will now continue with our panelists. Thank you very much, and wishing everyone a successful webinar.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity as we get started to welcome you also to this important event. I'm honored this morning to make this introductory presentation that is focused on climate change, ocean acidification, and disaster risk management in the fisheries sector. The Caribbean region is well known for its rich biodiversity and vibrant marine ecosystems and fisheries. However, we face unprecedented challenges due to climate change and these related threats, including rising sea temperatures, extreme weather events, storms, hurricanes, flooding, changes in ocean currents, ocean acidification, and these things are reshaping the very foundation of fisheries and aquaculture and posing significant threats to both the productivity and the health of the fish stocks, the marine ecosystems and marine biodiversity, as well as the livelihoods and safety of fishing and fishing communities that depend on the living marine resources and the fish stocks for their livelihoods. So this is the final seminar for this year in our series that commenced earlier this year. Now, as we all know, greenhouse gases coming from anthropogenic sources is increasing in the atmosphere. And as they increase, they're trapping the sun's heat, causing global warming and climate change and a lot of other consequential changes. And some of these we are really just beginning to understand. According to the experts, the world is warming faster than at any point in recorded history. And this is having major negative impacts on land and at sea, causing devastating changes to the balance of nature and the ecological and biological processes that have been in equilibrium for many, many, many years, thousands of years. Now, we in the Caribbean, in the fisheries and aquaculture sectors, have already been experiencing some of these devastating impacts arising from climate change. So before I go on to the specific issues related to climate change and acidification, etc., let me just emphasize the critical importance of our fisheries sector to our food security and livelihoods of our people. We have a fairly high per capita consumption of fish in the region, and fish is a very, very important source of food. Some people refer to it as nature's superfood. But fish is very important from a nutritional perspective, as well as just food security. But there are many other dimensions to the importance of fisheries: trade and foreign exchange, the significant job opportunities for some of the socioeconomically disadvantaged and vulnerable persons among us. It's important for culture and recreation. However, the fisheries sector has been under quite severe stress due to a number of factors, including pollution, of course, habitat degradation, irresponsible fishing, including IUU fishing. And of course, in more recent times, we have been dealing with the impacts and the challenges and the threats arising from climate change and ocean acidification. So in this brief presentation, let me just identify some of the specific impacts and issues and challenges, that we have to contend with. One, availability of fish and aquatic foods more generally, whether they be from land or from the marine environment. According to the experts, these will vary significantly due to the changes in the habitats, in the fish stocks and the species, in their distribution, in their productivity, as a consequence of the changes we're seeing in the environment, particularly in the marine environment, but as I said, on land also. Now, the stability of supply of fish and seafood is another issue that we have to pay attention to. The impacts are going to be significant. Already we are seeing significant impacts, due to the seasonality, changes in seasonality, increasing variability in the ecosystem and the productivity and distribution of fish stocks. So these issues of availability and stability of our food supply is something that we have to bear in mind, attend with. Now, access to sufficient seafood and aquatic foods more generally is also affected by the changes in livelihoods and the catching as well as the farming, aquaculture, as a result of the changes in the environment brought on by climate, acidification, etc. The utilization of aquatic food would also be impacted. And, in some communities, we're already experiencing this. People are now eating and using some marine species that they never used to see or even use before. The increase in availability of amberfish, while we have the decline in the availability of the larger dolphin fish and flying fish. Significant decline due to climate change, of course, associated with the sargassum seaweed. Now, according to the experts, tropical species, including tunas, are already changing in their distribution, and I think we have seen that here in the Caribbean region. But generally, many of these tropical species are expected to spread north and south, as the tropics get increasingly warmer. So the overall prediction is for decreased fish biomass in the tropics, and of course, increased biomass in the temperate waters as the tropics get hotter, and we have warmer waters further north and further south. And extreme events, whether it's hurricanes and storms, as well as those related to El Nino, will increase in intensity and frequency with the negative impacts on fisheries. And some of you may know that one of the first major collapse of major fisheries globally was due to El Nino in the early 1970s, the Peruvian anchoveta fisheries. Aquaculture and inland fisheries will also be significantly impacted and are being impacted by drought, water shortage, flooding, introduction of pathogens. We have seen aquaculture in Belize and in other countries decimated because of flooding and introduction of pathogen. But we also expect increased reliance, especially in the tropics, on production of fish and seafood and aquatic food from aquaculture. And as you know, aquaculture is the fastest growing food sector globally. Aquaculture is making great progress in the tropics, in the Caribbean region, Latin American countries. They're doing quite well, some of our Central American colleagues. However, in our countries, CARICOM countries, we're still struggling and haven't seen that significant increase in aquaculture production that we hope to have. But we need to continue to work on aquaculture because at the end of the day, with global warming accelerating and the negative impacts on our marine food production system for the long term, we will have to rely more on aquaculture production on land, but more importantly, at sea. So this is, for the long term. So we have to pay careful attention to that. Of course, we're all aware of the mass coral bleaching and mortality that's due to the warmer waters and also to ocean acidification, even though you may hear less about the ocean acidification. But the mortality of coral reef ecosystem means that the carrying capacity, the capacity of the system to maintain and support vibrant marine species is declining due to all these impacts arising from climate change. And therefore the fish stocks, the reef fish stocks, will naturally decline when the carrying capacity of the reef declines. Now we're also seeing other major ecosystem changes, and we are well aware of the sargassum impact on our beaches and our marine ecosystems. But it's of course not only sargassum. We're seeing increasing incidents of other harmful algal blooms, and these are all associated and connected to the major changes that we're seeing in the marine environment due to climate change, all the associated impacts. Now, I mentioned sargassum because this has been a particularly difficult issue for us, and I think we all realize, based on the scientific information, that this is connected to climate change, but it's also caused by other factors, including the agricultural runoff of fertilizer and nutrients. So, we're seeing eutrophication of the ocean along with the warmer climate, and these things are all contributing. But the ocean circulation system is also changing, and a part of the reason why the sargassum is inundating our beaches to the extent that we are seeing it is because of the changes in ocean currents, and that is transporting sargassum. So scientists are now referring to and calling this conveyor system in the ocean the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. So that's a major issue connected with climate change that, based on the scientific information, is going to continue impacting us for some time. Of course, the sargassum inundation varies from year to year and exactly where they beach. Now, let me turn to the issue of ocean acidification. The ocean's chemistry is changing due to the uptake of carbon dioxide. And of course, we all know that these carbon dioxides are coming largely from increased use of fossil fuel, coal, oil, and gas. These are the major source of the carbon dioxide, which is one of the main greenhouse gases causing global warming on the one hand, so warming atmospheric temperatures, but the ocean absorbs a fair amount of carbon dioxide, and that's a natural part of the cycle. Ocean has always absorbed carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide, when it's absorbed in the ocean, it dissolves in the ocean, and this leads to low of the pH of the water. This makes the ocean more acidic. The problem is that the natural cycle is being disturbed now because we have much more carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has been produced faster than the ocean can absorb it. And so what we're seeing is increasing amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and being absorbed by the ocean, and so the ocean is gradually getting more and more acidic. So the graph you're seeing on the right, the red shows the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the blue, the increase in absorption of carbon dioxide in the seawater, and then the downward trend shows the increasing acidity of the water as a result of the increasing absorption of the carbon dioxide. So normally the ocean is able to remove the excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but in recent times, actually, since the Industrial Revolution, the quantities have been increasing so much that it's disturbing the whole system, and at the end of the day, the seawater has been getting more and more and more acidic. So that's a major problem. So ocean acidification has a major impact on marine life. So the impact is negative because most species really are not adapted to dealing with the level of acidity that we are seeing in the seawater. And it's causing shells and skeletons that are made from calcium carbonate to dissolve. So, you know, we know acids dissolve certain compounds and elements, and so also the calcareous organisms, including the corals, they do not do well in the more acidic water. So their shells dissolve, or it's much more difficult for them to maintain their shell, and they have to spend and exert much more energy directed at repairing their damaged shell and just growing their shell. So you know, it's affecting the whole energy cycle and basic functioning of many of these organisms, and these include the coral, because it's calcium carbonate, sea urchins, very important, queen conch, lobster, oysters. You know, these organisms and many others, including planktons and zooplanktons, they're having major challenges. And some of these things are the foundation of life in the marine ecosystems. So the ocean acidification depresses the metabolic rates, it lowers the immune response, and reduce energy for basic functioning such as reproduction. So you can understand that this is all negative for marine ecosystems, marine organisms, and of course food for people. Now, some of the key instruments, let me just mention some of the key instruments that we have developed. Of course, we work closely with the 5 Cs and with SEDIMA to address climate change and disaster risk management in the region. The key instrument is within the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy. We have the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management in Fisheries and Aquaculture Protocol. So this is the second protocol developed under the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy, and it sets out a framework for adaptation and to some extent mitigation of climate change. So these are some of the things that we need to do going forward. We have to diversify the fishery sector. We have to also, seek to access markets where we can get higher returns for the fish that we are exporting. We have to invest in sustainable and resilient aquaculture production, as I mentioned earlier. Selective breeding, faster growing species, more resilient, strains that are more resilient to warmer temperatures, etc., as well as to reinforce our production system. So the system itself is not as vulnerable to flooding. For marine fisheries and marine fishers, the early warning system, we developed FURE under the PPCR project with the early warning system. We're having some challenges with it now, but hopefully in the coming months, years, we can revive the fuel application so that we can improve monitoring and communication with fishers and those who are at sea and get them early warning information when storms and bad weather is approaching. Of course, we also have to look at the vessel designs that we use and make sure we have improved vessels. But we also have to look at transitioning to more efficient energy systems in the fisheries and renewable energy where possible, not only in the harvesting sector and the fishing boats, but also in the processing plants. Insurance is something that, we have been working with. We have an agreement with CRIF, and they're rolling out and testing now parametric insurance for the fisheries sector. And of course, beyond just insurance, the whole issue of financing is extremely important also. Then mangrove, wetlands, seagrass beds, and other ecosystems, we have to focus on rehabilitation of these. It's amazing the level of protection, shoreline protection, and protection of assets and human settlement that we get from healthy mangrove forests, which we have destroyed in many cases. So rebuilding and rehabilitation, very important. And so we also have to look at promoting more resilient corals, and I know there is important work going on in the region looking at replanting corals with more resilient varieties. Of course, disaster risk management planning is very important, and empowering our coastal communities that are really so vulnerable to the storms. I mean, we have seen the devastation caused in our countries generally by the hurricanes, and the fishing communities tend to be bear the brunt of these severe weather systems. So strengthening our plans, especially focus on the fisheries sector and building resilient fishing communities is very, very important. And of course, the use of more climate smart gears and practices, whether it's the more efficient engines that we have, or the utilization of these underwater fans that have proven to be very, very effective. In this slide, I mentioned some of the research priorities going forward. Quite a few areas that we need to invest more in understanding what is going on so that we can take appropriate countermeasures from the migration patterns and the behavior of key marine species, etc. So quite a few things here, including better understanding what's happening with sargassum and trying to use the sargassum in beneficial ways. But we also have to look at strengthening fisheries management and governance and promoting climate resilience, and looking at not just the ecological and biological aspects, but the cultural and socioeconomic systems. And at the end of the day, significantly improve management of our fisheries based on the ecosystems approach, the entire ecosystem. Because one of the best things we can do for fish stocks really is to ensure that they have the best, that they are in healthy shape and have the best chance of withstanding these impacts of climate change, ocean acidification. So thank you very much. I had to rush through the last few slides, but I realized we got started a little late. So thank you. So that's a brief overview of the subject of climate change, ocean acidification, disaster risk management in the fisheries sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haughton. Unfortunately, Mr. Murray is unable to be with us today. However, he prepared a pre-recorded presentation, so we will share that with you now.
Good morning. I'm going to be looking at the state of knowledge and understanding of climate change impacts on marine ecosystems, fisheries, and aquaculture in the tropics, with special regard to our Caribbean Sea. Let's first take a look at the stressors, climate change stressors for the fishery sector. The main ones that are negatively affecting our fisheries sector are warmer seas caused by warmer air temperature, sea level rise caused by melting ice and expansion of the ocean water as it heats, stronger, more destructive hurricanes formed as a result of warmer ocean temperatures and greater levels of moisture in the warmer atmosphere. This means, of course, stronger winds, more rapid intensification of storm conditions, more rainfall associated with the storm, and higher storm surge. Another stressor is the less predictable sea conditions with changes in the customary seasonal wind patterns, changes to ocean currents that affect the speed and direction of local tides, and the transport of green water from the south into the Caribbean. Extreme weather events such as severe droughts or intense rainfall, and ocean acidification from an increase in absorption of atmospheric CO2 by the sea. The main climate change stressors will impact our fisheries in many ways and through a number of different pathways. There are probably 6 main impact pathways of relevance to our fisheries sector. Fundamental impacts on the ecology of marine habitats and physiology of marine organisms affecting the biological productivity of fishing resources. Changes in sustainable yield available to the capture fisheries and effectiveness of capture techniques. Alterations to the conditions for aquaculture. Effects on the well-being of coastal communities and fisherfolk livelihoods, implications for government and governance arrangements, and the knock-on effects in the wider society and national economy. Let's start by considering low oxygen. Critically low oxygen is becoming more frequent with warming waters. They result in, for example, summer fish kills, expanding dead zones where oxygen levels are too low to support life, as you see in the red in the diagram there. Reduced growth rate in fish under suboptimal conditions, and reduced living space for pelagic species like billfishes and tunas because the low oxygen conditions force them towards the surface. Another impact is coral bleaching. The anomalously high sea surface temperatures have resulted in increasing incidences of mass coral bleaching events throughout the tropics since the early 1980s. The first widespread coral bleaching occurred in 1998 during a global mass bleaching event. In the northern and eastern Caribbean, mass coral bleaching was extremely severe in the summer of 2005 when water temperatures exceeded any values previously seen in the 150-year record of the Caribbean Sea. And this happened again in 2010. In both these cases, the heat stress on corals was enormous, the highest ever recorded, and corals remained bleached for many months. This resulted in high levels of coral mortality occurring during both of the events, affecting 80% of all coral species and resulting in significant loss of live coral cover on most reefs, up to 40% on some of them. The mass bleaching has continued to happen across the Caribbean every few years, and there are predictions that it will become almost a norm, an annual event by the end of the century. Bleached corals are unable to grow or reproduce. So our coral reefs are now suffering from loss of the coral framework and a significant reduction in coral recruits needed to maintain the populations. As such, the reefs are being taken over by other members of the community, coral reef community, that are more resilient to hot water, for example, the sponges and the seaweeds. This means that there's less living space for commercially important fish species. So reduced fish biomass and lower sustainable yields to fishes are occurring. The loss of coastal protection services of reefs resulting in coastal erosion, loss of landing beaches, and damage to fisheries-related infrastructure are also things that we see. Let's now consider the free-floating sargassum. This blooming under warmer conditions, of course exacerbated by increased levels of land-based nutrients reaching the sea, and is being transported by ocean currents into our Caribbean Sea. Much of the floating sargassum gets washed ashore along the windward coastlines of our countries, resulting in mass sargassum stranding events. And these events significantly reduce oxygen in the water column that can become critically low at night, causing fish kills and loss of other biota, smother critical fish habitats, causing long-term ecosystem damage, and prevent air-breathing marine mammals and turtles from reaching the surface such that they drown. And of course, they damage beaches, especially during the attempted cleanup operations with heavy equipment. So the sargassum mass influxes also clog our harbors and bays, making access to vessels difficult. They damage both engines through them, overheating because they're working against the energy, as it were, of the sargassum. Sargassum trap along the shoreline produces these foul-smelling toxic gases, which, because it's rotting anaerobically, and this occurs especially when it's wet. There are other negative impacts, including the health risks to fisherfolk exposed to the gases, the stench affecting the fish market sales, the mass mortality of nearshore fishes and other marine organisms, significant disruption of fishing operations, and disruption as a consequence of coastal livelihoods. Sargassum at sea is also causing challenges for the fisheries sector by creating a hazard to navigation, especially at night. It damages fishing gear, making it difficult to or ineffective in terms of catching fish. There's lost fishing time because of the need to continuously clear and repair gear. Lost fishing days due to an inability to launch vessels, navigate to fishing grounds, or catch the fish using customary techniques. Some species are much harder to catch as a result of sargassum, for example, flying fish. In fact, in years of heavy sargassum influxes, flying fish catches are so low that flying fish can't be found in the market and fish owners lose their livelihoods. The customary seasonal abundance of some species is also changing. For example, dolphin fish are appearing much earlier in the season and at much smaller, younger sizes in years with sargassum. These impacts are resulting in significant loss of income in the fishery sector and loss of food security. Interestingly, sargassum at sea is considered a beneficial ecosystem, supporting high species diversity and biomass in the open ocean. This could mean improved production of commercially important species, the availability of non-traditional species to the fishing industry, diversification of markets which could help to alleviate low catches of other species such as flying fish. And sargassum may also provide new livelihood opportunities for fishers, either as harvesters or users of the resource. The higher temperatures will increase the likelihood of fish spoiling before reaching the consumer, resulting in wastage and human health impacts. The climate-induced increases in sea surface temperature is also been linked to increases in the incidence of marine diseases. Furthermore, the increase in sea surface temperatures and disturbance events such as hurricanes are considered to be a significant factor in the increased occurrence of benthic-dwelling algae, such as those responsible for causing ciguatoxin or for producing ciguatoxin that bioaccumulates in the food chain and causes ciguatera poisoning in humans consuming ciguatoxic reef fish. Then we also have to deal with toxic algal blooms, known internationally as hazardous algal blooms or HABs, and these are happening more frequently with high nutrient loads combined with the warmer sea surface temperatures. These have negative impacts for fishes and humans and are particularly devastating for shellfish mariculture operations. the air-breathing marine mammals, turtles, and humans can be negatively impacted by the toxic gas produced by these blooms. Furthermore, human fatalities can occur with consumption of affected species. And of course, we might say that it's not very common in the insular Caribbean, but there has been a clear trend of increase in the occurrence of these HABs in the region over the period 1956 to 2018. So let's now consider ocean acidification. Increased ocean acidity means that there will be fewer carbonate ions and more hydrogen ions in the seawater. What does that lead to? Well, it means that we're going to have less, shall we say, laying down of the calcium carbonate skeletons that form the reef framework. But in addition to that, we found that high levels of the hydrogen ions that will actually be found in the water column can damage neurotransmission, something that's called hypercapnia. And the early life history stages of fish species are particularly affected by this damage to the nervous system, such they have difficulty escaping predation and finding suitable settlement habitat, leading to greater mortality and as a consequence less successful recruitment to fish stocks. Okay, sea level rise means that storm surges will reach further inland and cause more coastal erosion and damage to the coastal habitats. This will, as a consequence, mean loss of valuable nursery areas for juvenile fish and lobsters. It will mean inundation of coastal settlements. There is likely to be major damage to fisheries sector assets, the markets, the jetties, the ramps. An increased chance of saltwater intrusion, damaging freshwater supply. And the freshwater supply is important for other aspects in the processing sector. So it means that this saltwater intrusion is going to impact the processing sector along the food chain. And furthermore, the engineered coastal protection structures put to deal with sea level rise will actually further damage the coral reefs and seagrass meadows and therefore cause further damage to critical habitats. We have to think of the impact of stronger hurricanes. Major hurricanes appear to be getting stronger and more frequent with devastating impacts, and we can think back what's been happening in the region in recent years. Fishery assets like boats and gear and buildings and harbors are being impacted on. Fisherfolk safety is definitely impacted on. The livelihoods are being impacted on. As a result of all of these, the national economies are being impacted on. The damage to critical fish habitats will also become worse and more widespread as these hurricanes get stronger. In addition to things like hurricanes as themselves extreme weather events, there are other extreme weather events we want to give consideration to. More frequent flooding events, for example, from extreme rainfall, and this will have impacts on the entire value chain, on the fishing communities, and on the wider society. In countries that have significant rivers, flooding of these rivers, as well as periods of drought on the other hand, will also affect freshwater and estuarine fishery resources, making them either more, in some cases, or less available to the coastal fishing communities, but also affecting the spawning success of some marine species such as shrimp. Severe drought and water shortages will impact fisheries activities that require fresh water, aquaculture, fish processing, the manufacture of ice for fishers to take to sea. And in fact, we may have to consider the increased need for desalination, increasing the cost of fresh water. Also impacting on fish populations, the warmer sea surface temperatures are negatively affecting fish growth rates, spawning success, and replenishment of fish populations. As a result, fish populations will likely diminish and therefore become less productive, with smaller sustainable yields available to the fisheries sector. Fish distribution ranges are also changing in fish as fish move to avoid the warmer water. And this can mean a number of things. Some species may move to deeper water. Some may leave the region altogether, likely heading north. And for these fishery species, it means that they become harder to find or harder to catch. And in some instances, complete unavailable as they move beyond the exclusive economic zones and out of the reach of national fishing fleets. Okay, let's take a look at the impact pathways again from a slightly different perspective. There are various such impact pathways along which climate change stressors will affect the entire fisheries sector, whether directly or indirectly. These include changes that will or have already occurred. For example, in biological productivity of ecosystems and the species they support, in capture fisheries yields, operations and fishing conditions, in aquaculture operations and risks, in fisherfolk community well-being and livelihoods, in appropriate governance arrangements, and generally, of course, in the wider society and in the national economy. So with that, let me thank you for listening. Apologies for not being in a position to actually take your questions or your comments at this point in time. I'm sure the other panelists will be able to do justice to that aspect of the webinar. So thanks for listening and have a good morning.
And we're very grateful to Mr. Murray for pre-recording that for you. Now we're going to move on to our next panelist, and he is Mr. Keith Nichols, Head of Program Development and Management Unit at the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. Mr. Nichols, please go ahead.
And I'm happy to be invited to share some of the thoughts on the key outcomes of COP28 implications and opportunities for Caribbean fisheries. This is particularly important, and I'm happy that CRFM took the path to identify what is happening globally and what fisheries will require to do to follow along with what's happening on the global scene, and hopefully to inform their own transition to more responsive fisheries. I selected 3 key outcomes from COP28. I thought, given the time constraints, that we would not be able to address more than the 3 that I have before us right now. And these are the transition away from fossil fuels, loss and damage, adaptation and mitigation. I'll discuss this in a bit more detail. The transition away from fossil fuels was the latest language emerging from COP28. For those of you who've been following the development and the discussions over the years, you remember that most LDCs and SIDS were pressing COP and the global community for a phase out of fossil fuels. So we went into COP20 speaking of a phase out, and hopefully, and we were hopeful that the global community would have addressed the issue of a phase out and agreed to a phase out. Now, some realists suggested that a phase out wasn't possible and we should speak more to a phase down. In other words, a gradual transition away from fossil fuels. And let's face it, some of our lesser developed countries in the region are more dependent on fossil fuels and have less opportunities to transition to high technologically changes or options, alternatives for away from fossil fuels. But the final decision, and this was a sticking point at COP28, was the language. If you were following the discussion, do you remember that the OPEC countries pushed back hard and said to OPEC members, do not sign anything that speaks of phase out of fossil fuels. So eventually, after protracted discussions, the final decision from COP was a transition away from fossil fuels. Transition, 1, I don't know if there's a time frame, but 2, it means that yes, there will be a transition. We are seeing some changes in the industry today, but is it going to be at the pace that is required to help us save the planet from itself, help us to keep global warming to be the 1.5 degrees Celsius? This year alone, we surpassed the 2 degrees Celsius barrier twice, or at least 2 or 3 occasions. But it means we are very near that threshold at the point of no return where the world spills out of control if we surpass that threshold, that barrier. So what are the implications for fisheries? Milton spoke to the need to transform the fishery sector, and he spoke to improvements in fishing engines and the plant and etc. The industry is supported largely by outboard engines, 2-stroke or 4-stroke outboard engines. I think in the main 2-stroke outboard engines. And in some instances, larger aircraft, diesel inboard or hybrid diesel outboard engines. They're all fossil fuel based engines. And if we have to transition away from those, what are our options? I know the industry is now considering electric outboards, and there are a few companies out there building high-powered electric outboards. The electric outboards have been around for quite a while in the domestic recreational fishery. But for the commercial or the artisanal fishery, we need to consider what the advantages and disadvantages are. What about reliability? The suitability of electric outboards. For those of you who've been following the electric vehicle growth industry, you realize electric vehicles, because of the weight of the batteries, are many times heavier than their gas-powered equivalent, or the internal combustion engine equivalent, what we call ICE engines. A lot heavier. There's also something called range anxiety. When what is stated as the range of EV changes depending on road conditions, depending on the temperature, and that sort of thing. Similarly, for a fisher who spends long hours at sea, extended hours at sea, would that require, if we have to transition to electric outboard, to extended battery packs? Batteries are heavy. Does that mean we would be able to reconfigure our fishing platform to accommodate batteries to satisfy the extended range of fisheries? Sea conditions would drain the battery significantly. There's a cost factor to be considered. There's support facilities to be considered, charging stations, ground support, etc. The backup power in the event that the batteries, for some reason, the power systems fail at sea away from land. And even if this means a reduced carbon footprint, which is all good, which is where we need to go, but the suitability of those engines for the fishing industry needs to be assessed, and there needs to be a program to transition away. So even if we feel that there isn't going to be a phase out of fossil fuels now, we can't wait until the time when we're actually phasing out to say, hey guys, we need to retool, we need to reconfigure. We need to do that research immediately and to determine if the electric outboard is appropriate for our fishing purposes, and if not, what other alternatives are there? The second issue is loss and damage, and I'm trying to keep within the 10-minute limit that I was provided. Loss and damage is a general term used by climate negotiations, which speaks to the loss and damages incurred from extreme weather events and what is called slow onset. The slow onset of those that are taking place gradually speaks to global warming, ocean acidification, and these changes will incur losses and damage in the long run. Now, although there is no official definition of loss and damage today by the UN, it is clearly understood that apart from the immediate damage from extreme weather events, hurricanes, storms, etc., and fisheries is a very vulnerable sector, long-term losses incurred will require us collectively as fishers to retool the industry, or to have data to back up our submissions. So damages will result in, the loss and damages may result in permanent alterations. Livelihoods would be impacted. And as Peter and both Milton pointed out earlier, you will see those changes taking place. Some are permanent, some will result in significant losses that will impact the fisheries. Now, the Loss and Damage Fund was established at COP28. And if today it's received only, and this is a milestone achievement. It was never thought that this would be achieved because developed countries had pushed back on Loss and Damage Fund for many, many years. So it was established very early at COP28, but today it's been populated to the tune of only $700 million, or just 0.2% of what is claimed to be required to address loss and damage. It's estimated that the annual cost of loss of damages can vary from anything from $100 billion to $580 billion. And I saw a figure of $1.5 trillion just a couple of days ago. The bottom line is, at just 0.2% of what's required, this isn't a drop in the bucket. That's just vapor, water vapor in the bucket. So yes, but the fund is established, and let's assume at some point in time the fund is going to be increased in terms of its capitalization and be available for developed countries. The question is, what do we need to do? We will need to have our data platform in place to submit any claims to loss and damage. So we need to know what the value of our platforms are, both in terms of the movable platforms, both the engines, our fishing gear, infrastructure on land. That needs to be able to be tight for us to determine, yes, there is a definite climate impact and change on our fishing platform or fishing industry, we need to submit claims to the loss and damage fund. That data is going to be important because it will serve as a baseline against which the requests for claims can be made. So we need to look more closely at our data platforms to ensure that we have what is required to serve as a baseline. But when we make submissions, we can clearly indicate that this is a consequence of climate change and impacts of climate change. Now, adaptation and mitigation, the third of the areas I chose, and Peter spoke to the impact of 2023, the extreme hurricanes. It was the warmest year on record. And in December 12th, NOAA says the warmest Arctic summer is evidence of accelerating climate change. And of course, we know everything about the elevated ocean temperatures that may extend to 2024. 2023 Atlantic Ocean temperatures among the highest ever seen. It will impact ecosystems, habitats, organisms, as Peter demonstrated. But the implications for fisheries. And there will be new rules which will be required to support the transformation that is required. We need to retool the industry, and Milton spoke to that. But we can't just arbitrarily speak to change in the retooling the industry, reconfiguring the industry, reconfiguring or retooling and retraining fishers. There has to be active change, active assessment of the impacts of those demands, of those changes, of those requirements, and determine what is needed to ensure that we can have a viable fishing industry moving into the future. The cost of doing business is going to change dramatically. So there's a lot more that we need to do. There's a lot more research that needs to be undertaken. There's a lot more that we need to assess, to reposition the industry to take advantage of those changing conditions. So with that short, and I think I've kept to my 10 minutes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share those thoughts with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Keith. I'm sure that everyone appreciates that very succinct update on COP28. And of course, kindly monitor the chat. We do have a moderated discussion after this. However, we're going to move on to our next speaker, and he is Mr. Adrian LaRoda, Chair of the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organisations. Mr. LaRoda, please go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Hello to the distinguished panel, Mr. Haughton and other presenters. I want to thank you for this invitation, and I want to again congratulate CRFM on its 20th anniversary. And as we are coming to the end of 2023, I'm looking forward to some other great things in 2024, because I'm sure the work of CRFM is just going to be ramped up after these 20 years. So thank you very much for having us, the CNFO. As was said, I'm Chairman of the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organisations and the President of the Bahamas Commercial Fishers Alliance. The record high temperatures experienced in the Caribbean this year can lead to the loss of marine habitats and species, acidification of our waters, and coral reef deterioration. Abnormal climate cycles cause more frequent and severe storms that have been destructive to our Caribbean coastal communities. I wish to make a short presentation on improving the resilience of fishers and coastal communities to the impacts of this climate change. It is not our intention to delve into the natural climate change or natural climate vulnerabilities and existential threats, but rather what can be done to improve the resilience of our fisher communities to these and the need for immediate action. Climate change has both direct and indirect impacts on fish stocks. Direct effects act on physiology and behavior, which can alter growth, reproductive capacity of fish stocks, mortality, loss of marine habitats, and dramatically shift migration patterns. Indirect effects alter the productivity, structure, and composition of marine ecosystems on which fish depend for food, and as such, coral reef deterioration and lost fishing days for fishers. I want to add and refer to a paper by Keith Banda that reads, "Climate change and climate variability have occurred throughout history, and natural systems have developed a capacity to adapt, which will help to mitigate the impact of future changes. However, two factors will limit this adaptive capacity in future. And one, the rate of future climate change is predicted to be more rapid than previous natural changes. And two, the resilience of species and systems being compromised by concurrent pressures, including fishing, loss of biodiversity, including genetic diversity, habitat destruction, pollution, and invasive species and pathogens." That was a 2010 report and assessment. We are now in 2023. So we can see that our climate variabilities has actually been affecting us now for longer than we really care to imagine. While most work on climate change in fisheries is focused on fisheries science and the economic and policy aspects of adapting the fisheries sector to climate change, fisheries policymakers need to develop adaptation strategies that take into account the economic consequences of climate change. Strategies that themselves must be adaptable to the uncertainty of the change, emphasizing that the luxury of time that vulnerable Caribbean nations do not possess. There is no need to re-emphasize the impact of climate change and vulnerabilities on coastal communities. However, we must underscore the urgency for action. Caribbean governments need to refocus on improving the social and environmental circumstances of fisher people and stop the removal, relocation, or co-opting of fish landing sites, destruction of secure mooring habitats, and place greater restrictions on industrial fleets to stop the overexploitation of nearshore species. How do we remain resilient? Strengthen small-scale fisheries with action plans that enable access to climate financing that will build resilience for fisherfolk, instead of overzealously supporting restrictive programs that diminish the ability of fisher people to secure decent livelihoods. Carbon credits derived from the marine environment should be directly applied for the benefit of fisher communities. With this, we ask, where does small-scale fisheries specifically benefit from the Global Loss and Damage Fund? And I want to refer also to the Bridgetown Initiative and the Paris Plan for Action. Where does small-scale fisheries fit into these plans? There is hardly any mention of it, other than glossaries. We would like to bring attention to a somewhat ignored condition, which is the psychological impact on fisher people. As we know, Maslow's tenets of human existence outline human needs when adverse weather affects communities. Physical needs are prioritized over psychological needs, and psychological needs are not given the same attention. We must be mindful that some people never mentally recover from such catastrophic and unpredictable events. We as fisher people need our Caribbean governments to be more emphatic to social protection. Emphasis and resources must now be directed to building sustainable housing and fish processing and landing facilities using innovative carbon-negative ocean-resistant material, shoring up coastal zones to minimize soil erosion, restoration of mangroves for fish habitats and nurseries, restoration of underwater seagrass fields for carbon absorption, strengthen global governance of fisheries through the SSF, the Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines, communicate clearly and honestly with stakeholders on how climate change will affect fisheries, and extend the rights-based use of the marine resources for fishers and protect our ecosystems. Fisherfolk are resilient and recognize that there is a basis for improved management of our fisheries and marine ecosystems and for adapting to climate change. However, in order to adapt to changing climate, future monitoring and research must be closely linked to responsive, flexible, reflexive management systems, not having rules allowed for one, but not for the other. Again, I want to thank you for inviting us to be part of this distinguished webinar series, and we congratulate again the CRFM on its 20th anniversary. And in closing, as CNFO, we look forward to the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines in 2024 as we endeavor to strengthen vulnerable fisherfolk communities and fisher people. That's my short presentation, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaRoda. That was great.
So we now segue into today's moderated discussion, which is focused on addressing climate change and ocean acidification, as well as disaster
risk reduction in CARICOM fisheries and aquaculture a collective responsibility. So we'll jump right into things, starting with the questions that were already posed in the chat. So there was a question from Dr. Patrick McConnell, and he was hoping that the speakers would address the SID-4 and the SSF guidelines plus 10 global events in 2024, and whether or not they can be seen as major opportunities to take forward a Caribbean fisheries and aquaculture action agenda.
Certainly, I think that's a very good suggestion from Dr. McConney. The session will be held, I believe, just before the COFI meeting. And usually our member states participate in the COFI meeting and in some of these events that are held around the COFI meeting, some of these side events. We normally meet, consult, and prepare our positions for intervention on the various items that would be discussed at these meetings and the formal COFI meeting in particular. So even though we do not at this stage have any concrete plans in place, I think, for SSF guidelines and the celebration of the 10th anniversary, I think I think our countries would be happy to get involved and work with all stakeholders, including the Fisherfolk University and NGOs that have an interest in having a coordinated regional position that is consistent with our objectives. So the short answer to the question is yes. I think we should get involved and have a regionally coordinated position to enhance our collaboration with the global community, with FAO, in moving forward the agenda and achieving the objectives of the SSF guidelines.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Haughton. And I'd like to acknowledge Arlene.
Hi, good morning,
Good morning,
colleagues. Thank you so much for taking my question. I just wanted to note that there's been a movement with regard to monitoring of mangroves and fragile ecosystems within our region through a project led by Surveyor Amazonia. This is funded through NASA and USAID, and the CMO headquarters and CIMH, as well as University of Guyana, have partnered with Surveyor Amazonia to work with a lot of agencies, local agencies across sectors that are closely related to the coastal environment, to develop better geospatial skills for monitoring those fragile ecosystems. And this is work that is continuing. We had a lot of workshops earlier this year in all of those institutions. And here at CMO headquarters, we worked with 23 participants and trainees from agencies ranging from the Institute for Marine Affairs to the Met Service to the Emergency Management and the Environmental Management Agency as well. And this was true in the other 3 institutions. So there is work ongoing that is related to this concern of the disappearance and mismanagement of the fisheries, that our technical agencies can help us to better quantify that kind of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlene, for that intervention. And good to note that there's work being done in this area. So in the chat, Dexter Mello posed the question: with the increase in coastal construction in many of the islands, we have seen the destruction of natural coastal protection. Can CNFO make it a priority to lobby for more coastal protection as we see governments making larger investments in the tourism sector. So I believe Mr. LaRoda would have provided some measure of response, but still over to you, Mr. LaRoda. Perhaps you would like to, say to the larger audience who may not be looking at the chat what that response is, and perhaps add to that.
Yes, Mr. Miller, thank you for your question. And we will say that as CNFO, we do have a policy position on with regards to coastal development. And bearing in mind that CNFO is, made up of the NFOs from the countries in CARICOM, and it is not really our mandate to interfere with intergovernmental, initiatives, more or less. We do have a policy position, and that is our tenet is to protect user rights, and user rights is for the small scale fishers. So wherever there is development that is going to have an impact, whether it's positive or negative on small scale fisheries, yes, CNFO has a position that either we will oppose any coastal development that will have a negative impact, or we will see how fishers can best benefit from the development to enhance their capabilities. Not so much leading to the blue economy, but again, we are mindful of that, and user rights of what we do, because fishers have the right to fish. And small scale fisheries is basically where we exist and in those spaces. Okay, so yes, we do have a position. And to be more direct and answer your question, whenever there's development that we are made aware of, we moving forward. That's always been our position. We've been doing it, and we will continue to do so. Lobby for small scale fisheries.
Thank you for that response, Mr. LaRoda. And certainly we know and appreciate the work of the CNFO, and having that policy stance in place is one that is certainly going to position the CARICOM countries and the CNFO countries moving forward, dealing with climate change issues. All right, so Mr. Kong, I now acknowledge you. You may pose your question to the panel or the audience at large.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to put my thoughts together, because you might imagine that I have 10 million things that I want to talk about, but I will not do that. I will just speak to some more overarching issues. My first thought is, is it the best approach to focus on one of the greenhouse gases? And again, perhaps Mr. Nicholson could address this. I mean, there are others, albeit not as potent. No, I shouldn't use the word potent. Not as the main culprit is carbon dioxide, but there are others. There's methane, there's nitrous oxide, there are F gases there, and the truth is, in Jamaica we say every mickle make a muckle. That means, everything that you work on will contribute to the picture. So I'm wondering if that is the right approach, and I'm wondering somehow it is the contribution of other industries. Albeit, yes, we understand fossil fuel and the industrial processes, transportation, whatever is key. But there are other sectors that are contributing significantly to the problem. And of course, the methane is there, and is it the best approach to just focus on that alone? And then the problem also, which I will jump into, one of my favorite topics you might have realized, is the demonization of the sector. I mean, it is a proven fact that the fisheries sector, fish and aquaculture sector, like small island developing states, have a negligible contribution to climate change. But if you listen to some people, it is as if fisheries is the cause of all the demise of the marine and of the aquatic environment. And to me, it is important that the sector is portrayed in a way that justifies its contribution. And I'm in no way stating that this sector, as other sectors, contribute to the problem. But when I hear we talking about, retooling and changing how we operate, which is of course important, the reality is we in the Caribbean doing that is not going to really and truly cause any impact at all on the global problem. And then I want to thank Patrick, Dr. McConney, for mentioning the SSF guidelines, because this is critical, that we have unfortunately not seemed to be paying the type of attention that we need to. And the human rights element that comes into the SSF guidelines. And Dr. LaRoda mentioned some key things, and I want to highlight the psychological impact also on small-scale fishers. If you listen to some people, they are the cause of the problem. They are the reason why the coral reefs are being destroyed. So we go around saying all sorts of things, banning all type of fishing. When you see what's going on in CITES, you're banning this and you're banning that and you're banning this. And what they're doing is impacting the livelihood of small-scale, vulnerable, marginalized fishers. While the same organizations don't have the same sort of veracity against the real perpetrators of the problem. We have to start to look at these things. And then here we go again now. When you listen to all of what has to be done, the retooling, the capacity building and all of the things, the infrastructure that we have to look at, how does this factor into what just happened at WTO? We need to start thinking about these things, When we, as small island developing states, try to find instruments or subsidies, as people want to call them, how is it going to be treated? So we need to start separating these things and teasing out these things, because we are going to need a massive retooling of our sector, especially in the tropics and especially for small island developing states. So I wonder if we need to put that dimension into the fray in terms of the fisheries sector, especially the small scale fisheries. How are we responding to these things in terms of justifying and ensuring the existence of our people? And when you look at when you look at the data and what is being said, the fisheries sector, the fisheries and aquaculture sector is going to play a more significant role with regards to food and nutrition security of a lot of the population of the world. So somehow there's the narrative that is out there just does it does not comport with the facts. And I think it is important that the sector look at this dimension to make sure that we justify justify some of the actions that we are taking and look out against, to use a Jamaican term, against the negative false narrative that is being expounded, that is demonizing the sector. Of course, I can say much more, but I wondered if any of the panelists could just respond to some of these issues that I'm raising. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kong. Always packing a punch. So over to the panelists. I would like to know who would like to begin to tackle some of what Mr. Kong would have shared.
First of all, let me thank Dr. Leng and Dexter and Andre for their intervention, comments, and question, all very useful information. Now, Mr. Kong asked the first question whether or not we should be focusing so much on the carbon dioxide, which is one of the greenhouse gases. Well, first of all, I don't think we are focusing exclusively on carbon dioxide. But the reality is that the carbon dioxide accounts for almost 80% of the greenhouse gases that we're doing. So it is by far the major one, and something that we can, that we really need to come to grips with. But we also need to address the methane and the nitrous oxide and the others, chlorinated gases and so on that we have that make up the mix of greenhouse gas. And indeed, we know methane is even powerful than carbon dioxide. But the fact is, it is a major source. Okay, just moving on. In terms of the negative portrayal of the fisheries' contribution to the problem, generally there's an issue there, and I think we need to always promote the use of evidence-based decision making. In other words, we should always be supporting, articulating, and pushing for use of scientific evidence in guiding our decision regarding the polluter, those who are causing the problem, whether it's at the WTO or in CITES or the COP. The truth is, fisheries does contribute some greenhouse gases, but really, the main polluters are the big countries, and we know them, and the fossil fuel, which from our countries, the contribution is really minuscule, and for the fisheries sector overall, it's really not such a big. But in the climate discussion, I do not believe that fisheries is being blamed for the greenhouse gases and for climate change. I think Mr. Kong might have been pointing that out in the context of the overall state of the marine environment and the degradation of the marine environment. Because what this shows really is that climate change, which is caused largely by other countries and other sectors, not so much fisheries, even though we have to recognize that fisheries contribute some, is leading to major changes in the health and productivity of the marine environment, and is likely to, and that's likely to accelerate as we go forward. At the end of the day, though, the impact is affecting us and our small-scale fishers in particular. So we need to engage vigorously with what is going on, and we need to advocate and promote and make the adaptation that we need to protect our livelihoods, our interests, and protect our communities and the welfare of our fishers. So at the end of the day, we have to focus on adaptation measures to protect the long-term future and viability of the fisheries sector. There are some mitigation measures that we can take, and even though the impact would be negligible, minuscule, as you said, Mr. Kong, every mix will make a bottle or something of the sort. So we also need to do what we can, but we need to press, and I think this is what I see at top. The global community really pressing the persons who are, to a great extent, responsible to take appropriate action and bear their fair share of responsibility, especially in addressing the loss and damage and providing the financing that is needed. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we may have a lot of plans and ideas, but the financing is so critical. And when you look at and hear the figures that we're talking about, unless the big countries and those with significant resources and have contributed mostly to the problem, unless they really step up to the plate and make the type of contribution and provide the support financially and with technology, etc., that we need to survive, really, it's going to be extremely difficult. So, we have to continue to fight and to press and to kick and to punch and do all that we can to get these, let's call them polluters, to recognize what has happened, what they have done, and take some responsibility in addressing these and helping the vulnerable countries and sectors like ours to stay alive. Let's put it that way. Thank you.
Mr. Nichols, go ahead.
Thanks, Sanya. Appreciate it. I would just wanted briefly to address the issues raised by Mr. Kong. Firstly, and as Milton indicated, carbon dioxide is used because it's considered an indicator gas, because it's the greatest volume of greenhouse gas, or the greatest volume of all the gases being emitted. Carbon dioxide is called the indicator gas. Methane is the most potent of greenhouse gases, but in smaller amounts. It doesn't mean that there aren't initiatives globally to reduce methane, but there's also methane occurring naturally in the environment, and sometimes those are released because of other events. Melting ice in the Arctic and Antarctic will release methane gas. As the permafrost is melting, methane gas is being released. There's also methane gas from agriculture, from cattle ranching, etc. But there are actions attempting to reduce the impact of methane gas and reduce the emissions relating to methane. But carbon dioxide is considered the indicator gas because of the greater volumes, as Milton rightly indicated. The sector isn't demonized, and I think it's recognized that SIDS, and certainly those of us in the Caribbean, but still is globally, contribute a mere fraction, maybe less than 1% of the emissions worldwide. But we are on the receiving end of the impacts, which is why we need to retool the industry, reconfigure our platforms, etc., because we simply can't continue a business as usual approach. The changes are taking place in the physical environment, and we have to be able to retool, to do everything as necessary to reposition the fisheries, to take advantage of the resources that will be available for exploitation. That is going to change, which is why we need to do all those changes. Now, there's nothing we can do about the changes taking place because of climate change. Like I said, we are on the receiving end. We are the most vulnerable. But so what do? We can't, if we need to be responsible, we have to be able to reposition the fisheries to take advantage of what resources are available as those changes are taking place, which is why we need to do the retooling and everything else. That is not going to be easy to do. That's going to take some time to happen. There are sovereign decisions that need to be made about the resources, but we simply don't have a choice but to respond to the changes that are taking place. So whatever we need to do from the administrative perspective, from the technological perspective, to help fishers adapt to the changing conditions, it means changing the platform, changing the way we fish, changing our gear and fishing facilities, both onshore and in the water. We simply do not have a choice. But yes, I think we need to put forward that argument globally that we are disadvantaged, we're the most vulnerable and impacted. We're not causing the change, but we are impacted by the change. And as Mr. LaRoda indicated earlier, that climate change always existed. It was always there. The world exists because of climate change. What we're experiencing is the impacts or the effects of accelerated climate change, which is a result of our industrialization. So, but we have to respond to those changes. Thanks.
I would like to at this time recognize Mr. Poutine. Have your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great presentations. I think that due to time, I know that Dr. Haughton or Milton, you'll be able to do a second phase of this because climate change is really critical for us within the region. As it relates to Dr. Kong, I know that you have been one of those passionate managers within the region. But what does the region bring to the table? And Milton clearly stated, we need evidence-based data, we need information. When we go to these meetings, COP and we CAFs in all these meetings, we are pushed aside by many of the developed countries. And within our localized sectors, within the wider Caribbean region, we are competing with various other stakeholders, such as shipping, such as tourism, all these other factors that are affecting our fisheries and marine industry. And I think I stand corrected, but I think one of the challenges that we have within the member states is data, evidence-based data. We need to do some more research. We need to, when we go to the table, we need to speak to evidence that is actually happening. What are we losing? The developed countries, I was just in a meeting the other day where some of the developed countries are recognizing the impact that the fisheries, climate change is happening, have happening on the industry. And they are pumping monies to ensure that the fisheries are safeguarded against these challenges. What are we doing in the regions? What our ministers are doing? When we have these ministerial meetings, are they really serious? Is fisheries on the agenda to be addressed? So and in-house, and I know that the region, the CRFM has been reaching out to member states as it relates to evidence-based data. I mean, I guess if you go to most of the Caribbean islands, there's not that data that we can present and say this is what is happening. And I think one of the ways going forward, unless we have that evidence-based information to show this is what is happening, and based on that couple $100,000 that is now being put aside, or probably to assess how much of it would we as Caribbean member states would benefit from. So I think that we just need to, regroup, do more research. We have CERMES, we have other agencies, we have CRFM. Let's do research and let us build our internal capacities to capture that evidence-based data to guide us going forward in the future. And this is what the global community is doing to safeguard their fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fontaine. Indeed, evidence-based research is key. I would at this time like to recognize again Mr. Kong and then Ms. Bernal Nichols. So go ahead, Mr. Kong, with your intervention.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to perhaps clarify some of what I was saying, but I suppose I didn't express myself properly, but let me just make a statement instead of asking a question. The experience in Jamaica, and I have noticed in other Caribbean countries, is that there is an attempt to demonize the fisheries sector by large NGOs and local NGOs in many countries. As a result of that, certain laws have been put in place to impact small-scale fishers based on erroneous information. If you were to listen to what they're saying, it is fisheries is the problem for the demise of the coral reef, and that is not so at all. I'm not saying that it doesn't contribute; it does contribute. And I would also like to suggest to you that the majority of people, well, certainly in Jamaica, do not know that there are other greenhouse gases. They do not know this. Most of the people think it is only carbon dioxide. And yes, carbon dioxide does contribute almost, over 70%, almost 80%. Yes, that's a fact. But the reality is that the total picture is not well known to the general public. And that is the point that I was trying to make. What we need to do is to make sure that they have information that the population have information. You have some people that would boast and say they don't eat fish because they're trying to save the environment, you know, but they eat beef. And I'm not trying to go against any other sector, but they don't understand. They will tell you that they will eat beef, but they won't eat fish and whatever, and they don't understand what they're talking about. So, and then now the issue of the funding. I think it's important for us to, as small and developing states, understanding that we have significant investment to make in our sector, especially the small-scale fishery sector, to start looking at these costs and determine exactly how this is going to be done. And again, I ask the question, how does this link to WTO and the so-called subsidies? You know, again, maybe the answer is clear, but we need to start looking at these issues. And then the other issue of the infrastructure. Many of the infrastructures that we have are right there on the beach. Right now in Jamaica, many of the infrastructure is being eroded. And the whole question of sea level rise is coming into being. So I'm saying that a lot of investment, a lot of retooling and capacity building will have to be taken in place. And this is going to cost a whole lot of money. And the small scale industry do not have the financial competence, the credit facility, and all of these other things to source these funds. So all of these assistance, retooling and so forth will have to come from our governments. And how is that going to be approached? Now we need to start looking at this thing. And my final thing is that we as a sector need to start talking more and more in the regional and international community to let people understand what the facts are. That is what I perhaps should have said instead of some of the other things that I said before. But anyway, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kong, for the clarification and for the perspectives. We have several hands up at this moment. So Bernal, since I had recognized you earlier, please go ahead, followed by Peter Murray, and then our minister is here with us, Sabota Caesar from St. Vincent the Grenadines. So we would like to take all three. We'll start with Bernal.
Good afternoon, everyone. I guess there's not very much for me to say now because all my thoughts were just brought out in the contributions of Mr. Pontin and Mr. Kong. So I would only just like to reinforce what they say because as I was listening to the contributions and the presentations, one of my thoughts, not only in this particular webinar, but all the time, one of my thoughts is that we always having these conversations regarding climate change. We are always having these meetings. We are always collecting this information. And my real concern is always that, you know, for us in the fishery sector, most of us or all of us operate our businesses mainly from the beachfront. And as Mr. Kong says, there is the issue of the eroding of the these beaches and stuff. And that for this, the meeting they just had, the COP was the COP 29 or whatever it is, these funds that they were able to access, are they going to seriously look at and involve the fishery sector in utilizing some of this fund to build out and protect the industry? Because a lot of people talk about how the effects of climate change, but we in the fishery sector can say that we get direct impact from climate change in every aspect, whether it is just the sargassum and the low landings that most of us are now experiencing, whether it is infrastructure, loss of livelihoods in every way, and not just for a short period. And I think that for our governments or ministers, that our real serious interest should go into protecting the fishing industry. And personally, I don't know that they are as serious as they say, we are always told how important we are, but then a lot of times things that are being done does not reflect it. I mean, I can say for my government here, a lot has been doing as far as infrastructure is concerned, but there are other things that we have to address. So I don't only speak for Barbados, I speak for all of our CARICOM countries who are involved in small-scale fisheries, and my contribution is about protecting the industry, looking out for it, and being seriously thinking of the contribution, because this is the contribution is what is never spoken about very much. Might not be the large majority as what is it, other sectors, but we make a valuable contribution, and our contribution may not be as far as the money is concerned, but we feed our nation, and that is to me a large contribution, and the industry should be protected, and that whatever monies come out of these meetings, the COP29 and the loss and fund damage, the fishery sector should be looked at, and some of that funds should flow directly into our fishing industries. And we in the fishery sector, we are going to keep our eye and ears on the ground as to what plays out in all of these islands regarding this money and how it is distributed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the intervention, Vernell. We know that you continue to be passionate about the fishery sector in Barbados and regionally. So I'd like to recognize Mr. Murray, one of our panelists, who is able to join us today. So go ahead. Okay.
Thank you very much. I apologize for not being there to give my presentation live and direct, but I hope it went down well. One of the things that struck me and has been bothering me for a while is that nexus between the climate change COP outcomes and the WTO subsidies agreement. We have a situation now where we recognize adaptation has got to take place for the fishery sector. The adaptation in the fishery sector will require inputs of money. To what extent will these inputs of money be read by the international community as being the types of subsidies to the fishery sector that they've been trying to avoid? We have to ensure that in talking subsidies, and when we negotiate in the second phase, as I call it, of the WTO subsidies agreement, we ensure that as much as possible, we are mindful of the need to make the world realize that our adaptation to climate change could not be or should not be seen as being one of those harmful subsidies. I just thought I would bring that linkage there, which is a concern to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And now we'll like to recognize our Minister Saboto Caesar, who was able to join us. Go ahead, Minister Caesar.
Thank you very much, and I wish to commend the organizers and excellent presentations, and the questions raise excellent questions as well. I want to begin from what I may consider to be climate change resilience 101. And I think sometimes we do not start at ground zero and we look at where we want to get to without, first of all, appreciating where we are. As it pertains to the sensitization of our fisher folk as to how we grapple with the vagaries of climate change, there are many persons in the fishing communities in my country, in the other member states of CARICOM, who are being hit by the impacts of climate change, and they do not know exactly how to address what they are being impacted upon by. The other issue that I want to canvass has to do with the fact that, for the most part, our fisheries officers were trained in a dispensation, in a period prior to the one that we are in, where we have to grapple with all these vagaries. And I think that a starting point, even before we begin speaking about money and loss and damage fund, we first have to re-educate our fishing or fisheries officers as to how do we deal with the issues of mitigation and adaptation. And this has to be done in a very structured way. It is in this regard that I want to recognize the work of the University of the West Indies and Professor Ganpat and his team, because they have organized a course for the agriculture extension officers as it pertains to issues touching on concerning climate change, resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And they actually have a course that is a postgraduate diploma course that is offered to the extension officers in agriculture. So I think that an important point of departure and something that we have to do quickly from the CRFM, working with the University of the West Indies and other institutions, how do we get the information in a very structured and organized way to the stakeholders? I think if we do not do that, we are going to see more rural-urban migration. We are going to see more of our fisher folk leave the industry because the margins are getting smaller, because persons now have to invest more because of the increase in the cost of production. Because the bottom line, when we speak about livelihoods and climate change in the same sentence, is that fisher folk are making less. And the question is, for how long can they make these very small profit margins, and in fact, in sometimes losses, and still continue in the industry? It is going to come to a critical stage where it is going to impact on food security, food sovereignty. We are already seeing in some countries where there's a scarcity of fish because we are not only providing fish for our local populations, but also for export. So if I'm to sum up what I'm saying in brief, I think there is a need for an organized trajectory as to how we are going to sensitize and how we are going to place out there for our fisheries officers and for our fisher folk an understanding and an appreciation of the vagaries of climate change. And this is something that we will need significant technical support, because right now I see a lot of the discussions about climate change. It's a very esoteric, up in the air discussion. And the fisherman right now, he's on the water trying to ply his trade. He is not a part of this discussion. Where do we go next? At what point are we going to have the different seminars with the fisher folk? And we have to ensure that we work with the ministers of fisheries so that they can get the ear of the heads of states and the ministers of finance, so that we can have a multi-ministerial approach, not only the Ministry of Fisheries, but also Rural Transformation and the Ministry of Education. Thank you.
So, Minister, thank you. Thank you for your comments. But just to make an intervention in terms of, in reference to his point about the fisher folk not being represented. I am chairman of the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organisations, which include the NFO from your country. So fisherfolk are represented. These are views of the fisherfolk. And I would like to encourage governments as we move forward, particularly our ministers in CARICOM, to understand and put greater emphasis on working with NFOs so that we as CNFO could build greater capacity and strengthen the organizations that represent them. We're not doing things in isolation. We're not doing things in silos. But what we've encountered is that not sufficient ministers in CARICOM appreciate that fisherfolk do have a voice, and fisherfolk do have a regional body that will and continue to represent, that does and will continue to represent them. I just figure I just wanted to add that because it's something that we encounter all the time. So thank you again, Minister.
And thank you for that contribution, Mr. LaRoda. Yes, Fisherfolk are certainly represented in this forum. We also have Vernell, who was the former, I believe, president of the CNFO. Mr. Haughton, Milton, I believe you had your hand raised. I don't know if you would like to make a contribution or intervention at this time.
Well, let me thank Minister Sabota Sesa for its intervention and usual very wise counsel. I wish we had more ministers like Minister Sabota, who is so engaged with the fisheries issues and really serious and interested in moving things forward at the policy level, a higher level. So thank you very much for all those wise advice that you have provided to us. I want to, I think this is going to be my last intervention. I just wanted to touch on the issue of the fishers and the fishing community, and this is consistent with the point that Honorable Sabota says raised and others. At the end of the day, the fishers are at serious risk, and I think we have focused a bit in the discussion so far on some of the practical actions to protect the livelihoods and the resource and base. But at the end of the day, the fishing communities are among the most vulnerable to the impacts of the storms, flooding in some cases, rising sea level, the practical safety of their houses, their communities, the facilities that they have. And so we really need to pay careful attention and give added attention to building resilient coastal and fishing communities in particular. And one of the things that is seared in my mind is the fact that in Antigua, when Barbuda was destroyed, there was one building that survived, and it was a fishing complex. And that became then the operational center for relief operations in Barbuda. And this was a complex built by the government of Japan. Now, a lot of the infrastructure in the communities are vulnerable, and we really need to focus on protecting the physical infrastructure of the fishing communities and diversifying their livelihood, which we touched on already. We have to look at building safe harbors, building safe houses that fishers can move to when you have these. Because it's not a matter of if these things are going to happen. It is just when our fishers are going and fishing communities are going to be hit by these storms and other severe impacts. The issue of customized emergency preparedness and response plans for the fishing communities and also for the fishers, but for the fishing communities, including the women and children, is something that we have to pay careful attention to going forward. And I raise this and I want to flag this because, in my opinion, this is an area that we really need to pay much more attention to going forward, because the actions in this regard is lagging behind, in my opinion. And I think it was Mr. LaRoda who mentioned the whole issue of social safety net for the fishers. Of course, I'd mentioned the insurance and so on, which I think is critical to pool the risk and be able to provide some quick assistance. I mean, I know governments have been, whenever you have these storms and hurricane decimating the fishers, governments and international organizations like FAO tend to provide relief assistance, partners like JICA and UNDP and so on. But this is getting more and more serious and more expansive. So we need to look carefully at providing and strengthening the social safety net for not only fishermen and fisherwomen, but the community and the infrastructure that they depend on for survival. So I just wanted to highlight these as we close, that we pay careful attention to, of course, protecting the resources, but paying careful attention. And the whole, you know, in my reading, I've actually been surprised at just how effective healthy mangrove systems are at protecting, not just, we just say protecting shoreline and coast, but I'm talking about protecting the people. There's a place in Belize which is very vulnerable, but it is surrounded by mangrove, and it's just amazing how the basic housing structures weather reasonably strong hurricanes when other more modern buildings, stronger buildings that were not protected by mangrove, how they survive. You know, you see the value of these mangrove and the great destruction that we have wrought on ourselves by clearing mangrove in so many areas to, you know, put tourist establishments and others, and some of this is still taking place. So one of the things that we really have to look at is maintaining those mangrove swamps that we have, and making sure that we build in harmony with the natural ecosystem, recognizing the value of these not only for shoreline, but also shoreline and you know, habitat for marine species and so on, but also to protect people and communities behind those mangrove systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milton. As I was trying to indicate earlier, as the discussions were really going on, especially coming to the closing here, that we have gone over our moderated discussion just about 15 minutes, but I would like to take the opportunity to recognize some of the questions that were posed in the chat, and then we can just begin to wrap up. I won't take all of them. I will just take maybe one or two that's directly in front of me right now. So I believe Mr. Morris had asked, and perhaps this is a question more so for Mr. Nichols. The question states, in light of the COP discussions, do the loss and damage provisions include slow onset impacts on valuable ecosystem services, and what is the mechanism for accessing these? So perhaps Mr. Nichols, in your wrap up, you can perhaps take this particular question that was posed in the chat earlier.
Yes, thanks. And this is an important question as well. The thing is, loss and damage is still in its infancy stages. It's in its nascent stages, and we don't have the formula for operationalizing the fund yet. But the fund, the loss and damage fund, should encompass every single thing we consider to be impacted by climate change, whether it's ecosystems, whether it's fisheries and mangroves and everything else. It will encompass treatment for all systems that are impacted by climate change. The problem is right now, the $700 million, like I said, it's not even a drop in the bucket. It's grossly inadequate to address the impacts that we are facing. And with a requirement that demands at least up to $580 billion, that's million with a B, dollars, to address issues, what we have before us is grossly inadequate. But yes, it is up to us to determine what we need to do to access the fund. We need to have the data, as Mr. Pontine spoke of. We need to have the data to satisfy our justification for submission to the fund. when the fund is sufficiently capitalized to provide the type of access and the type of support as required. But it's up to us to determine exactly what we want that fund to address. So it would include everything that is impacted by climate change, including all aspects related to fisheries. The simple answer is yes, it's up to us to do so when the fund is sufficiently capitalized. We don't know when that's going to be. It is still very, very early days yet. And the operationalization of the fund is not yet finalized. There's a lot of work to be done to get it up and running, but also to have the monies in the fund to support the claims that have been made by countries. But it will include everything we say we want the fund to address. And in short, yes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. And any other closing remarks from our remaining panelists? Perhaps Peter or Mr. LaRoda, do you have any remarks in closing?
I would be happy to yield to Mr. Murray, my senior.
And I was happy to yield to the fisherfolk representatives who are crucial in this whole discussion. No, I don't think there's much I could add. I noticed there from Nerissa getting in the chat, and maybe I'll speak to that, talking about acknowledging evidence-based decisions as critical, and how do we collect with the situation while working to collect that data, who will finance the research and data collection necessary. That's an important question, and I think that may be crucial to a lot of what we're talking about. Whether we're talking about being able to access loss and damage funds, whether we're talking about being able to properly adapt to our fisheries sector to climate change, it is a matter of where the money is going to come from. And that, I think, is something that we have to start to put forward too. And I'm happy that we have Honorable Sabotu Caesar here, because that is the sector or the subsector of the fishery sector, because ministerial, to me, that's another subsector, the decision makers, the direction setters. And I think that is what we need to start to talk about. That's what people like Mr. Caesar have got to start to bring to their colleagues in their respective governments and their respective cabinets and their respective parliaments, the importance of starting to put the type of funding into there. One, so that we can collect the data that will allow us to access whatever funds are available, and two, that we'll be able to begin the job of supporting the adaptation that must occur. I think I'll stop here for now as my final comment. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter. And in finally recognizing Mr. Kong and his final comments.
Sorry, Chair, I just wondered if this was the final webinar, and if apparently I'm seeing it's only for this year. Is that correct? Just for this year, but you will continue next year.
Yes,
Oh, I just wanted to big up CRFM in the biggest way, but I'll wait for the final one. Thank you very much. And as usual, excellent presentation. And can I say that I'm really heartened to see a Minister of Government join this webinar. It's really, really, Minister, big up, as we say in Jamaica, big up. And I'm really glad that you're here listening and participating. I think it spells volumes to have a minister join this. And again, let me just say congratulations to you all. And again, Your Majesty, I'm happy that you were able to join us. For those of you who don't know, His Majesty is Peter A. Murray. But thank you, CRFM, for this very, very important seminar. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kong. I just want to let you know that the questions that we were not able to answer in the chat, you can look out for those answers to those questions on the webinar resource page. And with that, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our esteemed panel and all our participants, especially those who made, very poignant contributions, and of course, our Minister Caesar. It certainly was great to have you join today's session. And now I will hand things over to Ms. June Masters to wrap things up with a vote of thanks, I believe.
Good afternoon to our partners, our friends, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the CRFM Secretariat, thank you for joining us this morning. We truly appreciated your time with us. And we'd like to thank the persons that produced and presented this morning's webinar. So thanks to Ms. Maren Headley for opening the webinar for us this morning and for introducing our panelists, and Mr. Deli Ramos for facilitating the webinar. Thank you very much, ladies, for your guidance, for sharing with us their insights and knowledge on building resilience to climate change, ocean acidification, and disaster risk management in fisheries and aquaculture. We express our thanks to Mr. Milton Haughton, Mr. Keith Nichols, Mr. Adrian LaRoda, and Mr. Peter Murray. To Sanya Compton, we thank you for navigating us through the discussions, which were rich and enlightening. Thank you. To our participants, to you all, we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and we know it was busy, especially during this period, our Christmas period, and it is also the last month of the year. So we don't take it for granted that over 90 persons, over 90 of you, and at one stage I noticed 101, but then I subtracted the CRFM staff. So it's over 90 persons, somewhere between 96, I would say. You were able to join us this morning. We don't take it for granted at all. We thank you. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for listening. We thank you for sharing your insights, your thoughts during the discussions. Your participation truly made the webinar a success. This is also the final webinar in the CRFM 20th anniversary celebrations for this year. We have had 5 webinars this year, and we have 3 others lined up for 2024. So please join us in the new year coming up. You will not be disappointed. But this being the last session for this year, we would like to take this opportunity to thank all our presenters, all our moderators, our technicians, all our facilitators, and those who were working behind the scenes to bring these webinars, not just the webinars, but all the other activities that we had for the 20th anniversary. We were thanking all of you for bringing these activities to life. And most of all, a special thanks to every one of you who participated in the webinar series, the CRFM Scientific Conference, and all the other activities related to our celebrations. A big hearty thank you. Again, it could not have been a success without you. Thank you for your words of congratulations. Thank you for your well wishes. Thank you most of all for your steadfast support of the CRFM throughout the 20 years that we have been in existence. And we have served the Caribbean only because you were there to support us. So we thank you. As we close the year, the CRFM wishes you a joyful Christmas and a happy and prosperous new year. And we hope to continue to be of service to you in 2024. So please join us as we continue with other activities, some related to the 20th anniversary celebrations. We're going to be structuring them into our day-to-day routine. So continue to join us for other seminars, other webinars, and so on online. And again, thank you for your support, your participation, and for being with us today. Have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen. And with this, we would like to close the webinar for today.
Thank you, everybody. God bless you, and have a wonderful Christmas.
Caribbean fisheries,
our treasure,
aquaculture, food security,
and sustainability.
Protect our livelihoods,
Development of fisheries,
economic, social benefits
for the Caribbean people.
For 20 years. Caribbean fisheries,
our treasure,
aquaculture, food security,
and sustainability.
Protect our livelihoods,
Development of fisheries,
economic, social benefits
for the Caribbean people.
For 20 years, the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism have been working towards a brighter future for our regional partner stakeholders.
Fisheries and